Over this past year, I had my wife, more lovingly known as the lady I live with, play a handful of video games in the hope that I might learn more about what games are like for people who don't really play them. This informal experiment taught me a lot about some of the barriers that exist for inexperienced players. Things that have almost become second nature to me proved far more difficult for her. She struggled with controls, especially when operating in a 3D space. She misunderstood signals and gameplay mechanics, causing her to spend far more time on certain sections than she needed to, and she often found herself disappointed by the limitations of games because they kept her from approaching challenges in her own way. Watching her play through these titles got me to view them through a different lens. I started to pick up on small successes and failures in the design of each game that I hadn't noticed before. There are many tiny aspects of games that more experienced players will most likely never pay any mind to, but for those without a solid base of gaming knowledge, these little things can drastically affect their approach. And after finishing that first experiment, I wanted to see what I could learn about other games by watching her play them. So based on the recommendations of many of those who watched the first video on this subject, along with my own personal curiosity about how she would approach my current favorite game, I had her play Breath of the Wild. It's well documented that this title supports player expression in a way few games do, and given that most of the games she played last time had introductions that were on the more scripted side of things, I wanted to see how Breath of the Wild held up for someone with little gaming experience. For this informal experiment, I had her play through the opening section of the game. The Great Plateau provides a fair amount of freedom for players to interact with the various systems and game mechanics of Breath of the Wild while still having a pretty clear and immediate objective for them to complete. While I considered having her use the Pro HUD, I ended up deciding against it because I wanted her to have a few more tools at her disposal. She didn't really pay attention to anything on the HUD though, so it is what it is. I also opted to be a little more helpful this time around. In the last one, I sat back as a silent observer in an effort to not influence her approach with any of the games. And as you may know, or could probably assume, it went great. For this, I provided refreshers on game mechanics and controls when she asked for them, but I didn't tell her where she should go or how to approach situations. All in all, this served as a way to keep things a little less overwhelming, allowing her to better engage with the game itself. So this is how it went. Given that video games are still pretty new to her, my wife had a fair bit of trouble getting used to the controls. In high-stress situations, she frequently found herself pressing the wrong buttons and canceling out of actions, which soured a few moments where she almost did something really cool. She also continued her long-standing battle against her greatest video game foe, the camera. Whether it came from her running too close to a wall and having the camera go inside of Link, or her not feeling comfortable with moving and adjusting the camera at the same time, she ended up not seeing a handful of things that could have assisted her. With all of that said, Breath of the Wild does include a few small touches that ended up helping her a fair bit when trying to figure out the controls. For example, whenever a button prompt comes up in the game, instead of just showing which one needs to be pressed, it shows where it is in relation to the other buttons. This may seem like an insignificant detail, but it led her to look down at the controller far less often. By showing her where a button was instead of just what the button was, it became easier for her to find it by feel. Another thing that helped her a lot was the lock-on feature. Regardless of whether or not enemies are around, pressing the lock-on button causes the camera to center behind Link, so she got in the habit of constantly using it to keep the camera in place. While it limited her ability to survey the wider landscape, it allowed her to keep her perspective under control. I assume that the designers didn't intend for players to use the lock-on feature in the way that she did, but it ended up making things far more manageable for her. I love the idea that mechanics that seem to have a single function can be manipulated by players of varying skill levels to have it benefit them most. She did continue to try to get used to controlling the camera with the joystick, but she kept saying that it didn't feel intuitive. Like most other modern games, Breath of the Wild's default camera settings are standard controls. So to look to the right, the player presses right on the joystick. Her instincts were the opposite though, and I found that intriguing. Inverted controls used to be the default setting in a lot of games, and a fair amount of people still hold on to that preference, but my wife didn't have any exposure to those titles. Obviously, it is possible that her brain is just wired in a way where inverted controls make more sense, but it got me wondering what outside factors may have influenced the preference. I can't be 100% sure, but my best guess is that it stems from her being used to inverted scrolling on her phone, as most touchscreens have that as the default setting. Given her lack of experience with camera controls in games, it makes sense that she would transfer this knowledge over. As a side note, on the topic of cell phone use possibly influencing her view of the game, there was a moment very early on, just before she exited the Shrine of Resurrection, where a text box came up that said authenticating. And because she is so used to seeing this sort of update on her phone, she waited for about 30 seconds before realizing that it wasn't actually doing anything and she could just press A to move on.
Why is this tape?
Anyway, once she made the switch to inverted controls, she began implementing the right analog stick more often, and by the end of the tutorial, she had a pretty good grasp over controlling the camera. I imagine she would have gotten better at this by playing any third-person game long enough, but I do think that her being able to use the lock-on feature to recenter the camera, along with there being so much open space to move around in, made it easier for her to figure things out. In general, Breath of the Wild's open approach to world design helped her overcome a few things that she struggled with while playing games in the past, the most notable being when it comes to games, and honestly life in general, my wife prefers to have a clear objective and destination in mind. So for the most part, she didn't purposefully stray off of the path in order to explore the various nooks and crannies of the Great Plateau. This threw me off a bit because when I played the game for the first time, I constantly felt pulled to check out places other than the destination the game set for me. Looking back though, a lot of the things that drew my attention only did so because of my familiarity with the other games. For example, seeing the remains of what looks to be the Temple of Time is sure to intrigue fans of the series, leading them to want to check it out. However, without the prior knowledge of its importance, she didn't feel the urge to explore it. And because the game was telling her to go somewhere else, that's where she went. All in all, she did a pretty solid job navigating where to go. Breath of the Wild doesn't fill its map with too much information, only including markers for the main objective and the locations of shrines and towers that the player has already found. This leads to a lot less clutter than the maps and mini-maps of many other open world games. The only time that she really struggled with knowing where to go was when she had to pin the various shrines across the Great Plateau. She kept trying to mark towers and shrines that were inaccessible without the paraglider. Ultimately, this is a small issue, but I do think it is one of the few failings of Breath of the Wild's tutorial. It is hard to grasp the size of the Great Plateau on a first playthrough, especially for someone who is still trying to get used to exploring a 3D space, and it can cause players to have to go through a fair bit of trial and error before getting it right. I wouldn't be surprised if more experienced players ran into this issue as well. It probably would have been a better choice to only have the shrines of the Great Plateau appear during this section as to cut down on confusion. Despite this, she did like being the one to place the pins of where to go because it gave her a better idea of what she would be in for at each of the locations. After setting the markers, she headed from point to point and, to my dismay, even used fast travel to get places more efficiently. My favorite stretch of her playthrough though came from the one time she did stray away from the main path. Just after getting the first objective to head to the marker on the Sheikah slate, she got into a fight with a bokoblin. All she had on her was a stick and it promptly broke. Panicked, she ran away. Sort of.
I'm just gonna I'm gonna just go like this the whole way.
There are a lot of ways a first encounter can go, but it does seem like the game tries to set the player up to learn its core combat loop by having them start with a stick. That loop being breaking a weapon on an enemy, picking up the weapon that they dropped after getting hit, and then mercilessly killing them with it. Given that she chose to run away, she missed the most important and fun steps of this loop, leaving her weaponless and far away from finding a new one without conflict. As she approached her destination, she saw a bokoblin blocking the path. Not wanting to get killed by it, she went out searching for a new weapon. I assumed she'd head back to the starting area to search for one, but because the only weapon she had found at that point was a stick, she figured that the forest would be the best place to find more. After searching for a while, she came across one, but decided to keep exploring in order to find a more reliable weapon. While heading through the forest, she narrowly avoided a few dangerous encounters before eventually coming up to a small fire by a cliffside with two rocks sitting at the edge. Just to see what would happen, she pushed one, causing it to fall, and a moment later she heard the sound of bokoblins being splattered.
It sounds like really violent.
For good measure, she pushed down the other one as well. Knowing that the bokoblins she had seen so far all had weapons, she decided to head down to the camp to see if they had dropped any. When she got down there, she fought the single bokoblin left alive, stole its bow, somewhat clumsily killed it, and then looted the camp. At this point, she felt confident in her abilities and armed enough to take out the bokoblin by the tower. There were certainly easier and more efficient ways for her to get a suitable weapon, but the approach she ended up taking led to an exciting and memorable sequence that made her feel resourceful and clever. I think my favorite thing about her little excursion is that it all started from her simply not noticing the weapons placed on the starting path. Her mistake led to a major success where she ended up being rewarded with a weapon far more valuable than a wood-cutting axe. And I can almost guarantee that she wouldn't have even gone in this direction had she just found a weapon lying around. And this really gets to the heart of arguably Breath of the Wild's greatest strength. It lets players do Throughout the playthrough, my wife almost never found herself feeling stuck, and that is largely in part to Breath of the Wild being designed in a way where there are many solutions to any given problem, even when that problem is one created by the player. A great example of this happened when she was trying to get to the first shrine. She walked toward it and saw a pond in the way. Thinking she wouldn't have enough stamina to swim across and climb up the other side, she looked for a different path. Given that this happened when she was still very uncomfortable with the camera controls, instead of looking to the left where she would have found a clear and easy way around, she went in the direction the camera was facing. In most games, her trying to take a path like this would lead to running into a wall for a while, but because Link can climb almost everything, it became a viable route. She scaled the broken wall, jumped over what she thought was a treacherous gap, but in reality only would have been a small fall, and climbed down the other side. Instead of leading to a moment of frustration or embarrassment for hitting a boundary, it led to one of discovery and excitement as she did something that felt adventurous. While the intended path was surely to just walk around the water, doing it in an unintended way felt more rewarding. A similar thing happened when she was heading to the shrine near the old man's shack. The intended path for this section seems to be talking to the old man, who tells the player to chop down a tree in order to create a bridge to the other side. My wife walked up to this area and didn't talk to the old man. Afterwards, she told me it was because she had just spoken with him at the tower and assumed he had nothing new to say. This felt incredibly strange to me because I've gotten into the habit of talking to pretty much every character I see when playing a game. I've been conditioned to assume that they'll offer some sort of helpful information on how to progress through certain sections. But as that idea has not been drilled into her head from years of playing video games, she opted to figure it out on her own. So instead, she took out a nearby camp of bokoblins and tried climbing from the edge of their camp to the cliff across. To be honest, I didn't know this approach was possible. I always thought it was too far of a climb and that the game was funneling players into learning the tree chopping mechanic. What's interesting is that the way she did it gave a far more useful lesson than the one I assumed the game was trying to teach. I can't really think of another time outside of the Great Plateau where I needed to chop down a tree to get somewhere, but I can think of hundreds of times where I had to find creative approaches to climb to a destination. So again, despite not noticing the path the game seemed to be suggesting, she found her own way that helped her develop a better understanding of stamina and climbing management. Ever since playing Breath of the Wild for the first time, I've been enamored with the amount of solutions the game allows for any given problem. It truly is a monumental achievement in terms of player expression. However, I've always viewed this from the perspective of someone who sees an obstacle in the game and actively decides which approach would be most effective or interesting. After watching my wife play, I now appreciate it in a new light. By casting a wide net of options, it not only allows experienced players the ability to experiment with different strategies, but it also almost guarantees that less experienced players will find at least one thing that they can grab a hold of to complete challenges. Obviously, there are still some elements that players of all skill levels will get hung up on, but for the most part, Breath of the Wild's versatile game mechanics mixed with its clever and detailed world design leads to an experience that is challenging yet approachable. It makes players feel like geniuses for overcoming basic obstacles, and that is extremely empowering, especially to those who aren't used to feeling good at video games. It helped her build confidence, and no game had really done that for her before.
I won.
No. After she glided away from the Great Plateau, I asked her what she thought of her time with the game, and the first thing she noted was that playing Breath of the Wild felt oddly calming. The combination of the beautiful landscape and the wide open space to move around in made it a place she enjoyed experiencing. She felt that there was time to breathe between the more intense moments. With the last experiment, most of the sections she played were filled with constant danger and tension, and while the onslaught of action was exciting in some ways, it was exhausting in others. With Breath of the Wild, while danger was still present, she had more options with how she engaged with various conflicts. She could attack from a distance with a bow, push a boulder on unsuspecting enemies, climb out of reach, or simply just run away. Also, moving out of one dangerous situation did not automatically mean moving into another, and I think having those breaks helped her a fair bit with feeling comfortable while playing. The majority of things that frustrated her in the games I had her play in the past didn't really come up in Breath of the Wild. She didn't ask questions like, why isn't this working, because almost everything she tried worked. To be honest, I'm surprised how friendly this game is to inexperienced players. It provides a challenging experience that doesn't force them into situations that may be out of their depth, and I think that goes a long way. In my last video on this, I ended it by saying that if you are ever in a situation where someone in your life who doesn't play games asks if they can try one, you should do what you can to help them understand it. You should teach them how to read it. I still very much think this is true, and it'd be wrong of me to not acknowledge that part of why things went more smoothly this time around had to do with me offering some assistance. With that said, while helping someone figure out how to play a game can go a long way, there is something deeply empowering for inexperienced players when a game makes them feel like they're teaching themselves.
Cool.
And while we're on the topic of getting better at things you might be bad at, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. As you may know, Skillshare is an online community centered around learning. It provides thousands of classes on subjects that range from graphic design to productivity to lifestyle. All things I need to be better at. I've personally been drawn to the courses on writing as, you know, it's kind of my job to write now, and a lot of my content focuses on the craft of storytelling, so learning more about how others approach writing has been really useful to me. Ultimately, Skillshare is a great resource for those who want to develop a new skill set or hone an existing one. And if you click the link in the description, you'll get 2 months of the service for free, giving you the chance to test it out and hopefully learn some new stuff. If you end up liking it, the annual subscription is really affordable, coming out to less than $10 a month. Give it a shot and aim to learn something that you've been wanting to learn for a while, but haven't gotten around to yet. Anyway, thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. For all of you who have watched this far, hey, I appreciate you. Let me know if you'd like more stuff in this, I guess, series of having the lady I live with play games. And also let me know what games or types of games you'd want to see us cover. I don't know how many videos like this we'll do because I don't want to just keep covering the same ground, but I do have a few more ideas, and I'm definitely curious to hear what you all think. With that, I hope you have a great day and or night, and I'll see you in the next one.
Oh my god, 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 oh my god. Stop. Oh my god. Help. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Girl, get it. Go. Why isn't she going?